sponsor talk that I've ever done, so I feel like I'm in a weird place. But yeah, so I work at the eScience Institute, which is at University of Washington, just across the lake from here. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing there to kind of to think about data science within the context of the university. And along the way, I'll get to tell you some fun things about astronomy and some other stuff that we have going on. So basically, what UW eScience is, it's a cross-disciplinary institute. And the goal is to provide training and support for modern data-intensive research. Right? That's kind of a mouthful, but basically, we're just trying to support all the efforts that are happening at UW in this space and recognize that there are lots of areas of overlap where we can learn from each other. And we're lucky to be funded by a lot of really great organizations. The big one is this one, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And this is what really spun up our efforts starting about a year and a half ago. We got this grant between UW, NYU, and UC Berkeley to start these data science institutes and explore what it means to do data science in an academic context. And then we also have all these other more local sponsorships to UW that help us to do the kinds of things that I'm going to tell you about. But first, before I kind of launch into these details about what we're doing, since I have a few minutes, I thought I'd talk about something that's really close to my heart, which is astronomy. My background is astronomy. I received my PhD in astronomy from UW, and I still, when I have the chance between all my other duties, I like to work on astro research. And a big part of my research that since my PhD that I've been working on is this thing called astrostatistics, which is sort of a cool conglomeration of different things. And the idea with astrostatistics is we're trying to take current methods that are used in astronomy, things that have been used for the last 10, 20, 50, or even 100 years, and extend them so that we can use them on sparse, noisy, heterogeneous data that we get out of modern surveys. How to scale these methods up to larger data sets, and then even thinking about development of new statistical methods that can help us answer these questions. So as an example of this, here's a picture of, does anyone recognize what this is? It's the Pleiades cluster. So this is a cluster of stars out there. It's called an open cluster because it's not as tightly gravitationally bound as other clusters, but it's actually a cluster of stars. You look at these up in the sky, and if you put your thumb out, the Pleiades is a little bigger than your thumb at arm's length up in the sky. That's what we're looking at here, and we know from studying these that these are not just projected. They're not just nearby each other in projection. They're actually nearby each other in space, and this brings up one of these interesting questions, which is how do we determine the distance to stars like this? This distance question comes up in a lot of things, and in all these different areas that we're studying right now. If you want to, say, measure the expansion of the universe and the Big Bang, you have to figure out the distances to these galaxies to measure their recession and how it relates to the expansion of the universe. Learning about dark matter and dark energy fundamentally is about getting accurate distances to these tracers. And other things, the spiral structure of the galaxy. Down here in the bottom right corner, we know that our galaxy is this spiral shape. And the reason we know that is because we can look out into the sky and see the distances to all these stars and map them out and see the spiral arms like this. So, but the question is, how do we determine these distances? And does anyone have any ideas how you, we're looking out at the sky and all we see is a little point of light out there. So how do we determine the distance to a point of light up in the sky? Someone said brightness. Yeah, you could use the brightness, right? If you know the true brightness and you know its apparent brightness, you can figure out how far away it is. And that's one really important thing. Any other ideas? Yeah, so measuring the time it takes light. If you had a way, the problem is you don't really know when the light started traveling, right? What's that? Oh yeah, if you could send a signal. So we've actually done that for nearby planets. Like you can bounce radar signals or light signals off the moon and get its distance very, very accurately. But unfortunately, with stars that are thousands of light years away, that doesn't work as well. Yeah, triangulation, that's another one. And that's actually kind of one of the more fundamental ones, triangulation. And in astronomy, we call this triangulation parallax. And the idea is, if you put your finger in front of your eye and you blink one eye and then the other, it looks like your finger's moving against the background, right? We do that same thing with stars, except our baseline that we're looking at is where we are in the Earth on different sides of the sun. So in July, the star looks like it's on one side. I think I have a laser pointer here. Does that work? Yeah, in July right here, the star looks like it's in one location in reference to the background stars. And in January, the star looks like it's in another location in reference to the background stars. So we can actually do that math, and then it's just simple geometry. If we know how far the Earth is from the sun, we can figure out that angle out to stars. And this is great. It works pretty well up until a few hundred, maybe a few thousand light years. The problem is the farther away that star gets, the harder it is to measure that angle. The angle gets really small as you move further and further away. Right, so then we get to this other thing that someone back there mentioned, the brightness. So we can, if we want to go out farther, we can use this method of standard candles. And the idea, again, is that if you know the intrinsic brightness of a star, and you know its apparent brightness, it's just this 1 over r squared relation, and you can figure out the distance to it. So like if you knew that each of these streetlights right here was exactly 100 watts, and you measured the apparent brightness from that streetlight way down at the end of the avenue, you'd be able to calculate the exact distance to that streetlight. So we can do that in astronomy, but it turns out it's very, very hard, right? Because you need to know the exact brightness, intrinsic brightness of an object. So now the question is, how do you determine the exact intrinsic brightness of a point of light in the sky that you're looking at? And it's kind of an interesting question, and there have been a few methods of doing this, but one of the more important in the last 100 years has been this idea of variable stars. So look at the star in the middle of these images. These are taken several weeks apart. And you can see the star is bright here, and then it kind of gets fainter. It goes away, it gets really dim, and then it gets bright again over a period of a few weeks. And these variable stars, the interesting thing about this is if you plot them up, you see kind of a pattern in the variation. So this here, we're looking at the brightness on the y-axis versus time on the x-axis. And you plot these stars and you see that they get brighter and fainter and brighter and fainter. And people knew about these for a long time, and they were studying them. And there were people whose jobs it was to look at these stars and catalog these observations and kind of look at these things in detail. One of the more famous names that you'll see in this area is Henrietta Leavitt, and she was a computer. Back in the days before computers were these digital machines, computers were actually women that were hired by places like Harvard. So she was a computer in the astronomy group at Harvard. And what she did with her time was look at these photographic plates of stars and measure very precisely the size of the stars on the plates. And because of the characteristics of photographic plates, the size of the star is related to its brightness. And she was looking at repeated observations of these variable stars, just like this one right here, and found something really interesting. If you look at the period of variation here on the x-axis and plot it against the distance that you know from other measurements. If you look at that period and the distance, you can see that there's this relationship between them. There's a linear relationship, or almost linear relationship. So what she showed is this fundamental thing, that you have a period luminosity relationship between stars. Sorry, I messed that up. I said this is distance. This is actually brightness on the y-axis. So we're looking at the period versus the brightness, and there's a relationship. So what this means is that if you look out into space, if you look out at a distant galaxy and you find one of these stars and it has this shape of variation right here, you can, from that, infer exactly what its intrinsic brightness is, And from its intrinsic brightness, you can compute the distance to that star, right? So this has been fundamental in 20th century astronomy, this sort of thing. And a big, something that you've probably heard of is Edwin Hubble. Hubble Space Telescope was named after him. He discovered, using this distance redshift relationship, that the universe was expanding. And all of a sudden in the early 20th century, our conception of the universe entirely changed. And we now have this idea of the Big Bang and the expanding universe and things like dark matter and dark energy. And this is all because Henrietta Leavitt did the detailed work of plotting these variable stars and found this incredible relationship that enabled all this science. Right, so where do we come in there? Where do we come in after this? This kind of analysis is actually going to get a lot harder in the future. And that's because instead of looking at just 20 little data points that we can think about and ponder individually, we're looking at millions and billions of data points, right? And pushing these methods, these types of things like finding periods in stellar data, pushing these methods into the realm of data that we have now is a challenge, and that's where astrostatistics comes in. So one example of where this is going to get incredibly challenging and incredibly interesting is this project called the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope. This is a mock-up of the telescope that's being built right now on a mountaintop in Chile in the Atacama Desert, driest place on Earth. Just for reference, this is the size of a person in relationship to the telescope. So the telescope has about an 8.5 meter diameter mirror. It has one of the largest CCD cameras ever developed. It has, I think I did the calculation once. The camera has so many pixels that if you wanted to view an image where you saw every pixel in it, you'd have to stack 1,500 high-definition TVs in a grid on the wall in order to see every pixel of a single image. And that single image, there are going to be 2 of those exposures every 30 seconds. And that's going to happen over the course of 10 years every night. So the data rate is about 30 terabytes a night, and we end up with a catalog of hundreds of petabytes of data. And from this data, it's basically the idea of the LSST telescope is that in the past, if you were an astronomer wanting to study something, you would apply for telescope time and then point the telescope there and look at it. Now, in the LSST era, if you're an astronomer who wants to look at something, you write a SQL query. And then you have the observation of it, right? It's turning the sky into the database. And the important thing about LSST is it's going to scan the entire sky. It has such a large field of view that it'll scan the entire sky every 3 nights. So it means that we have 1,000 frames in this whole sky movie over the course of 10 years. And there's a lot of data in there. But this data is interesting. It's it's large, but it's also, if we're looking at faint objects, there's a lot of noise in the data, and we're also looking at very heterogeneous data. What it means when you're trying to create a survey that solves everybody's problems at once, you don't solve any of those problems exactly perfectly. So if I want to do something like learn about dark matter in distant galaxies from LSST, the data that comes out of it is not exactly what I would design for a purpose-oriented survey that's just for finding dark matter. So it's a little bit more difficult to work with. But it serves everyone's needs pretty well. That's what I mean by heterogeneous. So one example of heterogeneous is each exposure isolates one wavelength range. Like you might look at red light versus blue light versus green light. And for some things, like finding variability in stars, that's difficult. Because you compare the red light one night to the green light the next night, and all of a sudden you need a model of the spectral variability of that star in order to say if it's varying. So things get difficult. And just as an example of, I like to show this because it shows that I still can do actual scientific work even though I spend most of my time hacking away at code. This is a paper that we submitted earlier this year where basically we were looking at a new method for periodograms of multiband data. So essentially, we're looking at this data and trying to figure out if this is periodic, so that we can figure out what type of star it is and use it as a distance indicator, like I was showing before. And with old data, with the types of data that we used to get from these purpose-oriented surveys, if you look at any single band, here we have the ultraviolet band, the green band, the red band, the infrared, and the far infrared. If you look at any single band, you get a periodogram with a nice spike that tells you exactly what that period is. So what this says is that with old style data, pre-LSST data where you're looking at things every night through every band, any single band is good enough to use the old method and basically find the period. But when you start looking at the type of data LSST is going to have, it's not a purpose-oriented survey. So you have more heterogeneous data. You have fewer observations in each individual band, and you can see here that the old method doesn't work. You basically lose the periodicity and the noise. And what we propose in this paper is a way to essentially use all this data at once and create a multi-band periodogram where you recover that information right there. So the cool thing about this, I like to say that astrostatistics is great because it's really easy, right? Statisticians would look at this and say, well, yeah, we knew how to do that in 1960. But astronomers don't know how to do this yet, right? It's essentially what we did is we created a regularized general linear model for the data, and then did a few things to pull it out. So it's nothing really, really sophisticated, but it's a new application in astronomy. And this is something I love about astrostatistics. You can kind of talk to your CS colleagues and your stats colleagues and brainstorm and get some ideas, and you come up with something they've known forever that you can apply anew in astronomy and make some progress. So it's very cool. And the progress that we're making here with this is if you compare the dotted lines, which are the old methods, the best of the old methods, to the solid line, which is our method, you can see that after 5 years of LSST data, we're recovering 100% of these interesting stars that'll help us trace out the structure of the galaxy, whereas the old methods would have recovered only about 50% or so. So it means that with simple progress in statistical methods, this means we can do about twice as much science in a given amount of time. So this is the kind of stuff that I work on and a lot of other folks in astrostatistics like to work on. So the important features of this, I should say, is that it's simple, it's well documented. If you want the code, you can do pip install Gatsby. This is the best acronym I've ever come up with in my life, by the way. This is generalized tools for astronomical time series in Python. Gatsby, it's great. And I meant that. And the code's on GitHub to reproduce the entire paper. So you can basically go and everything from the LaTeX source to the source of the figures to the simulations that we did. So this is the kind of thing that's becoming very important. This reproducibility and this putting your code out there to put the actual scholarship out there instead of just the advertisement of it, in Donahoe's words. And this is the kind of thing that we're pushing at the eScience Institute. So I was talking about astronomy, but if you look at basically every field, you're getting into this data-rich era where there's this deluge of data, right? This is why everyone's talking about big data and why everyone's talking about data science, because there's data everywhere. Our ability to gather it and store it and process it is improving. And so the eScience Institute was started in this context and starting to think about, how do we encourage and support good software practices? How do we keep good software engineers in academia so that we can do the types of computationally intensive research that we want to do to learn more about the universe or about whatever we're studying? And more importantly, I think, how do we facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration so that astronomers can learn from statisticians, and so that neuroimaging folks can learn from physicists who can learn from social scientists and everyone who's working with data at different scales. And then also we want to be able to train academics to be good computational researchers, right? Because most of you, if you've come from an academic background in scientific research, you'll probably say, yeah, I learned it all on nights and weekends by reading books and looking at web tutorials, right? The curriculum just doesn't teach this stuff that we're talking about here at the PyData conference. So UW eScience started with that goal, and it's been a pretty cool ride. I joined in January of 2014, right as the big NYU, Berkeley, and UW things started gearing up, and we kicked off in February 2014 with a university-wide call for research posters. And this was awesome. We had 137 posters from 30 departments. And this is Mary Gates Hall at UW with all these faculty members and postdocs and grad students interacting and talking about research from all different areas. This was the first time for a lot of people that they had branched out of their own department and their own field to learn about what other people were doing. And that's spun off, and we have this really broad original core faculty team. I won't name them all, but you probably recognize a few folks here. Jeff Hare is behind D3. Carlos Gestrin is a founder of Dado, and lots of other great people. But the point here is that it's very broad. We're all across campus, right? If you take a look at the departments where these people came from, this is UW map right here, stadium down there where the Huskies play. And this is the map of the campus and all these places where the PIs come from and where the steering committee and the participants come from. So we're really covering the whole campus. And what we did with eScience is we started the center right at the middle right there. That's the sixth floor of the Physics Astronomy building. We have this data science center. And Bill Howe, who's one of our directors, looked at this and he said, well, what if we, pull that off the map and then we send it to a graphic artist and we get our logo. So this is the eScience logo. It's about connecting the whole campus and having this hub at the middle where we can pull people together and have them learn from each other. So I have about 5 minutes left or so, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And in that time, I want to tell you a little bit about the highlights of what we've been doing there for the past year and a half. A few things. One of the big things we have is promoting interdisciplinary careers. So I'm kind of one of the poster children of this, the interdisciplinary career thing, and I feel very lucky to be where I am because, I was kind of a struggling astronomy postdoc trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Thinking about industry opportunities, thinking about academic opportunities, and really what I wanted to do was just contribute stuff to scikit-learn, but there was nobody who wanted to pay me for that. Until eScience came along, and basically they said, they provided me a position where I can, in my role for the majority of my position, I can kind of define what success means. Whether that's writing a paper one quarter, or contributing software, or teaching a class, or things like that. And there are several people who are at UW who are working as data scientists or research scientists who are in that same kind of role where they can define what success means for them within the context of eScience. And within reasonable limits, you can do that. So we also have interdisciplinary postdocs, research scientists. We have faculty members who are in eScience and also another department. We have short and long-term fellows, and an example of one of these people is Mario Urich, who's an astronomy professor. I was mentioning the LSST telescope. Mario is the lead, I think he's the principal scientist for data management, or I can never remember which exactly, but he's one of the higher ups in the LSST project. And he's one of these faculty that was hired half by astronomy and half by eScience. And he's an example of a person who probably wouldn't have been hired as faculty by astronomy just on the merits of faculty by itself. But the fact that he was doing this sort of intersection area, working on data science and astronomy, meant he was a really good candidate for this interdisciplinary position. And what this hire has done is it's made UW basically the place for survey astronomy in the next 10 years. We have three of the very, very high up people in LSST with Mario and Željko Ivesic and Andy Connolly. So it really has helped. It's helped UW become a prominent place in the astronomy community. Another thing we have that's pretty cool is this data science incubator program. So we're taking our cue from startup incubators and saying, what could we do with a student or a postdoc in 10 weeks if we had 10 weeks of focused time with them? So we have we put out this call, we do this twice a year now, put out this call for people to come work with a data scientist for 10 weeks, for a quarter. And they basically commit to 2 days sitting in the eScience Institute, in the studio space, and working on their own project, but having kind of a mentor in one of the local data scientists. And the types of, there are a lot of different projects that have come through. Here's one that I really like. This was a project by Gregoire Lurton, who's a master's student working with Avi Flaxman, who some of you might know. He's active in Python and R. And they had this data set about health records in Kenya. And essentially, the data was in about 1,000 or maybe 2,000 Excel spreadsheets. It was all hand entered by people out in the field in Kenya or out at various institutes in Kenya. And they had this zip file of Excel spreadsheets that was sitting on the disk for 4 or 5 years because nobody knew what to do with it. Nobody knew how to work with this. So Gregoire worked with Dan Halperin, who is one of our data scientists, now is at Google, and Avi Flaxman, who's a professor at the Institute for Health Metrics. And they figured out an automated method to kind of clean this data, to go through it, to organize it, and essentially unlocked all this information that had been sitting there already. And it was a 10-week project, and it was actually pretty impactful. Gregoire Lurton was able to write his master's thesis on it, and there's been some other projects based on it, and have learned a lot about what's going on in health in Kenya. So this was a 10-week project where we just matched him with a data scientist, and he went for it. Another thing we have going on is interdisciplinary education. So we have a PhD program with data science tracks. We have data science certificates for undergrads. We're working on expanding that more. And then we have a lot of formal and informal workshops like software carpentry. And an example of this is we have this 2014 cohort of PhD fellows. So all these 6 students have a home department, but they applied for this fellowship and are now. The cool thing about this is we got these 6 departments to agree to let these students forego half of their core requirements in their PhD program and instead take things like machine learning, statistics, database management, and stuff like that. Data science skills that they can then apply and teach folks in their own department. So it's kind of this cool interdisciplinary PhD thing that we have. Another highlight is the data science studio, this kind of picture in the background. It's a pretty awesome space, and we have a lot that goes on there all the time. It's open space. It's where the desks are for the data scientists. We have a lot of meetings and education things going on there. And the location is pretty awesome. It's the 6th floor of the physics astronomy building, 360-degree view. I sit at my desk and I look out the window and I see Mount Rainier over the water. So it's not too bad. And that's really important because if you want people to gather together and work together, you have to have a space that they want to gather in, right? If you're in a windowless basement, I don't think many people are going to make the trek across campus to hang out. But the space that we have is pretty nice, and it's been successful. We've had a lot of really nice collaborations come out of people just coming in to work there and be there. And one thing we have going on this summer that I want to plug, this is pretty cool. We followed the lead of University of Chicago, who's done this program called Data Science for Social Good. And we have 16 student interns who are mostly grad students, about 3/4 from UW, and a number from other places on the East Coast and throughout the US. And they're matched with 4 nonprofit groups that are working on these social good projects that are very data intensive. So these are the names of the projects. For example, I like the open sidewalk graph for accessible trip planning. This is essentially, this is a project that recognizes that there's a lot of data out there about sidewalks and crosswalks and curb ramps and things like that. But it's not out there in an accessible way, right? It's hard for someone who's mobility impaired to say, how do I get from 3rd and Pike to 6th and Union the most safe and effective way? So what we've done with them is we're working with SDOT, Seattle Department of Transportation, to get access to all these data sets and to put it into a format, into kind of an app that people can use. And the goal by the end of the summer is to have an app where someone can ask for directions from point A to point B, and it will basically tell them how to get there in a way that matches their mobility constraints. So it's some really cool programs going on here, and this is kind of what the data science studio looks like on a daily basis this summer, which is great. We have all these students working together and meeting and breaking out in little rooms and writing on the whiteboards, and really excited to see what's happening. So anyway, that's all I have to say about the UW eScience Institute. Here's my contact info if you want to get in touch and ask more. And I think we have just a couple more minutes for questions. Thanks, Lorena. Yeah. Well, if there, oh, yeah.
Do you think that the data science for social good program will be something you'll continue to do on an ongoing basis, or is it just a one-time experiment?
Yeah, the question is, are we going to do the data science for social good on an ongoing basis? I think at this point it's a one-time experiment. We're halfway through the summer, but if it's successful and if it seems like something that's been a good use of our effort, then we'll definitely do it again. And I would say so far, from 5 weeks in, it seems really, really awesome, and I would anticipate that we're going to push for it again next summer. Yeah.
For the data scientists in like companies, Microsoft or Google, are there ways to collaborate with these institute studies while working on our companies? Like, is there anything
Yeah.
you can say?
That's a good question. So the question is, for data scientists working in industry, is there an avenue of collaboration with what we have going on? And the answer is that that's something we've been thinking about really hard, and we'd like to do that. The concept we have that we might experiment with is this idea of an externship rather than an internship. You know, if we can get folks from industry who either get their company to agree or decide to take a sabbatical to spend time working with students at UW, I think that would be a good model. We actually have a couple people from industry who've taken leave from industry and are now working part-time or full-time as data scientists in the institute. So that's something, if you're interested in that, we should talk, because there may be options for those sorts of things, and we're really interested in making it happen. Yeah.
What is the key action or key thing that you're doing to foster this interdisciplinary collaboration?
That's a good question. The question about the key thing we're doing to foster interdisciplinary collaborations. It's difficult because everybody is, at the university especially, is pretty siloed. But we have a kind of multi-pronged approach. We're trying to get students, we're trying to get people young when they're students through these kind of interdisciplinary graduate and undergraduate programs. So the PhD students I mentioned have an advisor in a data science department like statistics or computer science, applied math, as well as their home department. So we have that. We also have a lot of interdisciplinary seminars, and we try to bring in well-known speakers and do socials after that. And so people end up hanging out and talking. We have a lot of space available where research groups can come and meet, and our experience has been that professors and students tend to hang out in the studio after their research meeting and just work for a little while. The other thing is the incubator program has been really big, because it's allowed us to make connections between students and postdocs who are in the incubator with their research groups and with other people in the incubator who are from different groups. And an example of that is I worked with someone who was measuring earthquakes under Mount St. Helens and trying to find time domain characteristics of earthquakes. And it turned out that there was some literature in astronomy variable star time series that was relevant to the problem they were trying to solve in geophysics. And based on that, we have a postdoc coming in the fall that is going to be co-advised by myself and John Vidali, who's a geophysicist at UW. And so then now we have this kind of direct avenue of astronomy and geophysics in informing this research and informing each other. So it's happening, and we're experimenting with how to best do it. But those are our ideas. Yeah, one more.
So I saw that you had social sciences up there, which is interesting. I come from a social science background, and computational methods are either the subject of enthusiasm or total derision.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about how you make that happen, what you're hoping to do with the social sciences.
The question is what we're going to do with social sciences, because often computational methods are not recognized. We're lucky to have some really good computational social scientists at UW who have been on the steering committee, some faculty members. And so they've been really driving that. And it's actually one of the explicit things in our grant between NYU, Berkeley, and UW is to include fields like social science and fields like ethnography, learning about data science itself. So we've been lucky in that sense, and with programs like this Data Science for Social Good, it's also a nice way to get social scientists into the data scene, I guess. So I think we're out of time. We should probably break for whatever is next, and thanks very much.